Hi, I'm Yatka, and in this video we try to create art and beauty on a computer like it said in the hacker ethic. Um, we're trying to make a version of the iconic image Schotter by Georg Nees, an early piece of algorithmic art from the 1960s. Here on the left side you can see Schotter. This is an original print from the Staatsgalerie in Stuttgart, and as you can see, it's an artwork made of multiple rows of squares, each row getting a little more messy by changing the turning angle of the squares. And we now try to do that in Snap. So this is my Snap window. If you're working with Snap for the first time, you might want to check out the Snap introduction video first. I post a link into the video description. For the other ones, you can just start right away. So as you saw, this is made from squares. So we can now draw a square in Snap and make a block which does that, but in this case, as we want to make it as simple as possible, we'll just go to the Costumes tab and draw a square costume. I'll select the rectangle tool here, increase the brush size a little bit, and you can constrain the proportions of a shape by pressing Shift or checking this box here. And I do that now, so I can draw a square. And if I click OK, my object switches to that costume. This is a little large, so let's first make it a little smaller. I go to the Looks category and pick the Set Size to block. Maybe let's set the size to something like 30%. Yeah, that looks about right. Okay, the next block that we need is one from the pen category. It's the stamp block. The stamp block stamps a version of your sprite, of the costume of your sprite, onto the stage. So if I click on the stamp block to execute it, it looks like nothing happened, but if I move the object away, you see that it left a trace on the stage. So this is just a stamped version of the costume. I can do that once more. And if I want to clear what I've drawn, I can grab the clear block, which is the first one in the pen category, and click on it once. And this is my original object, which of course stays on the stage, but everything that was stamped or drawn is gone. Okay, now we try to, looking at this Schotter image again, we try to create one row of squares next to each other. So let's start with a starting position somewhere at the top left corner of the stage. So maybe we go to x negative 120, y, let's try 140. Let's maybe even do 160. This looks about right. And now we need to stamp our sprite and move its width. So we can just change x here after we've stamped the sprite. And the amount that we need to change x is the width of our sprite. So I want to stamp it, and then I want to change x by the width of my sprite. You can find out the width of a sprite with its My block. So in the drop-down menu, select width. Currently the sprite is around 40 pixels wide. So I now want to change x by my width. And then I can stamp it again and change x again, so we can even put that together, change and stamp and then change, stamp and then change, stamp and then change, and so on and so forth. So let's do that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times automatically. We can do stuff more than once automatically by wrapping a loop around it. You can find loops in the control category. In this case, I want to use the repeat loop. And I'll just wrap that around here and select 8 here. So let's clear the stage again and let's execute all of that. Perfect. This looks about right. So as a next step, we need our sprite to move to the next row, and then we want to repeat the same thing basically. So to get our sprite from here back to there, we need to first set its x position back to the negative 120 where we started. So we can do that right away. We set x to negative 120. So we have our object here now. And in the next step, we need to change its Y position. And since it's a square, we can just change the Y position based on the width again. So let's grab it, change Y by block, and let's change it by the negative amount of the width. So I'll just multiply my width by -1. Okay, let's check that. Let's go back here, let's clear the stage, and let's try that. Now our sprite is in the right position, and if I click on it again, it should just draw the next row. Okay, this seems to work. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We can do that automatically as well. So let's just wrap another loop around here. And we repeat this 9 times. And now we can draw the whole grid at once. Okay, perfect. When we take a look at Schotter again, as you recall, we need to make the squares a little more messy. So we need to include a variable for the turning angle. Right now, we all the squares face in the same direction, but now we want to, in each row, increase this possible turning angle. And to do so, let's add a variable. I'll call this angle. And at the beginning, for the first row, the angle is supposed to be 0 because all squares should be in the same order and not turned. And then after each row, we want to change that possible turning angle. So after I've done a row, one row is one of this inner loops. After I've done that, I change the possible turning angle by, let's say, 2. If I draw it like that, that doesn't change anything because I didn't use the variable yet. So to use it, we need a point and direction block. So what we want now is we want to point, for each row we want to point in a, or for each square we want to point in a random direction based on the angle variable that we currently have. So we want to point in direction 0 plus or minus the turning angle that we have. So for the first row, we want to point in direction 0 plus minus 0, which is just this direction. For the second row, we want to point into direction 0 plus or minus 2, and then so on and so forth. So we should get an increasingly disordered array here. Let's try that. So I'll grab a pick random block, and the maximum value should be the angle, and the minimum value should be the negative amount of the angle. So again, we multiply the value of the angle with -1. So in this case, now our angle currently is is 18 because we went through all of these 9 rows. Well, let's check what happens here. If I click on that now, I expect that I get a value between -18 and 18, -9, -18, -4, 0, 8. So I now point in that direction randomly, and we want to do that for each square, and we want to do that right before we stamp it. So let's clear it again, and let's see how this looks. You see that we get an increasingly disarranged grid of squares, but you can also see that something's off here with the right side. The problem is that we're currently changing x by the width, but since we're pointing in different directions or turning the sprite, this means that the width of the sprite changes. Let me show that to you. I'll move the original sprite to the center. Right now it's turned a little bit, so if I check my width now, it's currently 47.9 pixels, but let me point into direction 90. Now it's only 39.2 pixels. So what we need to do is we at first need to save the original width in the right orientation in a variable, and then we can use that variable wherever we used the width here. So let's try that. We make another variable. I'll call this box, and we set box at the beginning to my width. And just to be sure that we're doing that while facing in the right direction, let's point in direction 90 before. Okay, let's try this again. We need to, of course, to use it here and here. So where we used my width, we now use the value that we stored in the box variable. Okay, let's try this again, and you see that the right side now stays the same. Let's even make our sprite a little bit smaller so we can fit a few more rows in here. Let's increase that to 12 maybe, and let's increase that to 10 maybe, and let's try it again. This looks nice. We can even add one more row. Let's try it again. Okay, perfect. So this is the basic project that we can now use, but there's a few ways to change or even improve it. Right now, the center of each sprite is the center of the square. So this means the maximum amount or the maximum difference that you can get is the one between 90 degrees and 45 degrees, but you can make it a little more messy if you, for example, change the rotation center to one of the vertices of the square. To do so, you can go back to the Costumes tab and right-click your costume and select Edit. Here with this symbol, you can change the rotation center of a sprite. If I click on it, you see what I've just explained. The rotation center is the center of the square. But you can use these and move them, for example, even outside the square. Let's try it here. And then you can draw the same thing again. Oh, wait, let's clear first. And draw the same thing again. And you see that it gets way more messy and that the squares move way more and the distance between them can increase a lot. Let's try this once more. Let's maybe just add the clear block at the beginning as well. You can also adjust the angle here. So increasing the angle you change after each row increases the amount of disorder in your drawing. Okay, what else can you do? So right now we did it with squares that only have a contour. We could do it with filled squares and try to apply a graphic effect. So let's go back to costumes and let's draw another square. Maybe I'll pick blue here, and this time I want to draw a filled square. Okay, if we draw it with that costume, let's increase the size a little more. If we draw it with that costume, you see that all the squares are blue now. So this is not what we want, but we can apply graphic effects. So in the looks category, you can find the block Set Ghost Effect 2. This block has in its drop-down menu several graphic effects that you can use. Let me clear the stage again and let me move the sprite to the center. So when I set let's use the color effect at the beginning. When I set the color effect to 0, I'll just get the costume that I had in the beginning. When I set the color effect to, let's say, 20, then it shifts the color of the costume. The color effect of 100 is the original color. So you can shift the costume or the color of the costume along that color band here. So we started with blue, shifting it by 20 led to pink, shifting it by, let's say, 30 to 40 should end up red. Let's check that. Red, orange, and then so on and so forth. And after 100, you're back at this blue color here, or at the original blue color. Okay, so we can now also set the color effect randomly. Let's grab another pick random block and let's use it as an input to the color effects block. Maybe we want to set the color effect to something random between -10 and 10. And we also want to do that for each square. So I'll added here right before we stamp the square. Let's try this again, and now you can see that you can get different shades of blue, and you get a Schotter from that. Let's make it a little smaller and try it again. Okay, perfect. Again, also here, if you want to increase the amount of disorder in your image, you can edit and change the rotation center to something outside of the square and not at center. Let's try this again, and you see that the distances differ way more than they did before. Okay, what else can we do? We could, for example, start with, oh no, we could just use another shape. So let's try it with circles. How does it look with circles? So let me draw a circle, maybe a red, orange one. Yeah, let's do a red one. And let's try this again. All the circles, of course, have the same direction, so I can't really see anything if I'm not changing the rotation center. So let's do that again. And let's move it somewhere outside. Let's try here. Let's make it a little bit smaller. And let's try it again. So you can see that it also works with circles and looks kind of cool. We can now, for example, explore another graphic effect. So let's check the saturation effect. The saturation effect regulates the amount of color in your color. So if the saturation of your color is pretty low, you have nearly no color intensity or hue intensity in your object, which means that it's either black or gray or white. So let's start with a low saturation. So we can set the saturation effect to -100. So we start off with gray, and then we could increase the saturation each row. So at the beginning, we want to set the saturation effect to -100 to start off with gray. This is what this would look like. And then we want to increase the intensity of the color for each row. So after we've drawn a row, we change the saturation effect by, let's try 8. Okay, so let's try this. We start off with a pretty low saturation and we increase the color intensity in each row. This looks kind of nice. And then there's different things that you could do. So for example, you can also change the structure. Going back to the original costume, you could, for example, increase the angle until you reach the center of the stage, and then you can decrease again. So the most messy part would be the center of your Schotter drawing. Let's just try that. So I switch back to the original costume. This is, let's decrease the size again. This is what it looked like. And now we want to decrease the angle again, starting here maybe. So let me just duplicate that. Let's just make the squares really small. This looks right. And then let's just duplicate this whole part. So you can right click on parts of your script to duplicate them, and you have them attached to your mouse then, and wherever you click you can release them. And now we just change the angle by -3 again. So let's draw that. And this means we have the most messy part in the center, and then we get back to a way more ordered structure. This looks also kind of neat. And then of course there's many more things that you can explore. So for example, here's a version of Schotter that I created, and I will add a link to the video description where you can create a version of Schotter with a photo of yourself. So I click on the stage to take a picture of me. If you use the camera for the first time in Snap, you need to allow camera access. If you've done that before, you can just click on the stage and the camera will start. To start the shottering process, you can just hit space when you like the image that you can see on the stage, and then you will get a version of Schotter with your photograph. This seems a little, yeah, this is a little too colorful for me, so I also included a slider at the bottom here, which lets you posterize your image. In this case, this means that you check, this happens here, in this case this means that you check whether a pixel is above the slider threshold that I defined or below. If it's above, I make the pixel yellow. If it's below, I make the pixel blue. So let's try this again. This is the original photograph, and with the slider here I can posterize my image, and you can move the slider from left to right to change the slider threshold, and if I like that I can just stop clicking it and I get the whole Schotter with my photograph in just yellow and blue. Again, the link to this project is in the video description and you can try it out yourself. And of course, it doesn't need to stop here. So there's way more things that you can do and way more remixes and interactive versions that you can come up with. So what you can see here is a version of Schotter that changes its color based on the frequency that my microphone is picking up. So you can make it fully interactive. Here you can see versions using the saturation effect and the different shapes that I've shown you. You can also do that with your family images as you've just seen, and you can also bring it back to the physical world in other ways than just printing it on paper. This version uses Turtle Stitch, and version of Snap that can export files that can be read by digital embroidery machines, so I used that to embroider Schotter onto pillowcases. And last but not least, here is an illuminated version that I made using Snap, and I created an SVG file in Snap and used that then in the laser cutter in our local makerspace and made this version with LEDs and a picture frame. So I hope you can see that there's a lot of remix ideas that you can still explore, and I hope you now want to get started creating your versions of Schotter or other algorithmic art that you might find interesting. Have fun and let us know what you did.